Alright, so we're in the Su-25T doing a cold start. So the first thing we're going to go through is the keybinds real quick of what you're going to need. So you are going to need obviously all the access controls of pitch, roll, rudder, and thrust. I also have the zoom slider as well as track IR set up for myself. This is dual engine, so you are going to want independent thrust if you have it. And then for the startup, you're going to need the electric power on. You are going to need gear up and down. You are going to need flaps up, down, and I also use landing position for full flaps. If you want, you can use navigation lights for multiplayer. Gear lights if you're doing night missions, air brakes if you need it, air brake on and off, and then you are also going to need wheel brake on. Oh, one last control is left control C for canopy closed. So to start this, we're going to need to turn the electrical power on. While the electrical power is getting started, take a look at the clock underneath the TV. It is 5:15. So we need to wait at least 3 minutes. So we're going to wait until that gets to the 4 marker before we move the aircraft. That doesn't mean you can't start the engines, you just have to wait for the system to align itself, the navigation system. So to start, you can start with either engine. I always start one at a time just because it's good practice for the other one. You need to have your throttle all the way back so the plane doesn't explode. And then we're going to start the right engine. You can see here, start RE begins, and you'll see the needle on the RPM gauge start to rise. I like to wait for the hydraulics light to go out before I start the second engine. There's the hydraulics light out, so we'll start the left engine. Now it's going to get loud, so we're going to close the canopy with left control C. The engines will rise to about 40% and then settle, and the light will go out. So we'll wait for both engines to start. While we wait for those to start, let's go over the gear and flaps. So this is the gear and flaps indicator. You have a gear knob there. The flaps are right here. You have an up, down, and landing position. And this indicator, if you look through the manual, you can read about it, but you have 3 green lights for the gear. The center light in the middle of the airplane is when the hydraulics are being used, which is when the gear is going up or down. The outer lights is for the air brakes. If you go to flaps down 1 notch, the first light will come on. Landing flaps, the second light will come on. The last thing before we start to taxi here is down here at the hydraulics you should see the brakes, left hand and right hand. If you hold the wheel brakes, you'll see that rise. You really want to pump these brakes and try not to hold them too long. The landing gear on the Su-25 is not the strongest, so you want to be gentle on it. Today we are empty, we have no load, so we're pretty light and I can move pretty fast, but normally you want to move pretty slow, especially on the turns. So the last thing before we move is I'll get the navigation lights on and the gear lights on. You don't have to turn the navigation or gear lights on. I just like to for multiplayer servers so people can see me on the runway. So to get moving, you're going to want to bring the throttle up to about 80% on the RPM gauge, and then once you're rolling you can pull it back to about 50. And just like that, we're moving. So to know where to go, you can hit F10 And you can see right here, to get to the runway, we just need to follow the markers all the way down here. So we will just go straight, turn right, and go down here. So bring it to 80%, and then pull her back, maybe 60% to kind of keep you moving. If you're making a turn, you want to pull off of it. Make sure you're going nice and slow for the turn so you can go a little faster on the straightaways. And just follow that line. I'll have this mission in the description for download. You can use it yourself. It's got a cold start and a landing plane set up already for it. So we're getting close to the end. I'm going to kill the throttles and start pumping them brakes. If you look down at the bottom at the brakes, you just keep following that line. And then normally on a multiplayer server, you're going to stop before the runway, check to the right, make sure no one's coming in to land, check to the left, make sure no one's on the runway. You would normally request to take the runway, and then you would take the runway. Like I said, we're light, so it doesn't take that much throttle at all to get this thing moving. And since I'm not flying with anyone, I'm going to line up right in the center. Alright, and that's a cold start and taxi. In the next video, we'll go over taking off and landing.